Well, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful that you can join us today for this workshop. It's proudly presented to you by the e-assessment team in Italy. Today, we're going to focus on using the Inspera Assessment platform to target critical thinking with auto-mark questions. My name is Jacinta Lysek, and I'm a learning designer in the e-assessment team. And today we're joined by a few other learning designers. We have Dale Hansen and Tanya Henry. Plus, our team manager, Jackie Liner, will be here with us too. And for more support, we also have Peter Rutherford and Kim Henville. So to find out who you are, we thank those of you who have answered the questions in the chat box to introduce yourself. So if I have a look at the chat now, I can see who's joining us from UQ Faculty, Schools and Institutes. And we've got somebody from the veterinary hospital, accounting, it looks like, in the business school. And yeah, so a few people from vet and business so far in Italy. And one or two more, architecture and more business. Great. Well, thanks very much for saying hello and for being here today. So to start our workshop, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet. And I would like to pay my respects to their ancestors and to their descendants, who continue with cultural and spiritual connections to country. And together we recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. So thank you for your time to make this acknowledgement. Looking at our timing for the workshop, we have 3 topics and each will have about 10 to 20 minutes to present key ideas. Plus, we'll give you a few minutes to complete a few short activities. So we invite you to share ideas throughout the workshop using a Padlet and the Zoom chat box. Plus, we'll set up some breakout rooms for each of the activities. So in the registrations for this workshop, we noticed that a few of you are existing users and a few of you are not yet using Inspera. So when we complete activities, we'll set up 2 breakout rooms. One will be for existing users and one will be for new users. So, because our focus today is about critical thinking and assessment, it's important to keep in mind that we are aiming to assess the quality of student thinking, more so than assessing their responses to difficult problems. So with that in mind, the purpose of the tips that we'll present today is to use auto-mark questions in Inspera in ways that target aspects of critical thinking with enhancements to the design of assessment questions. Therefore, the tips are intended to be used either separately or combined and across discipline areas and in the assessment platform for Inspera. However, the tips are not exclusive to Inspera and can be relevant to other assessment formats such as paper and other online platforms. So we also want to remind you that this workshop is not about how to build questions in Inspera. So if you do need support for building Inspera questions, we recommend that you visit 2 key websites where you can find building guides. So you could go to the UQ e-learning website as well as the Inspera Help Centre website. And so today we're going to talk about how we can design questions to assess critical thinking using a variety of cognitive verbs such as analyse and evaluate for students to engage with and demonstrate a range of cognitive skills. So for critical thinking, we can design questions to target different thinking skills by using a variety of cognitive verbs. And this will engage our students to demonstrate different aspects of their knowledge, understanding, and skills. So cognitive verbs indicate the type of thinking skills that students need to demonstrate when they respond to a task, such as answering a question for assessment. So typically a question will use 1 cognitive verb, for example, identify or analyse. However, a question may use 2 cognitive verbs to facilitate an auto-mark question. So for example, a question may use wording like analyse the stimulus to identify correct alternatives. So when we're writing assessment questions, we recommend that you use the cognitive verbs from the learning objectives that are being assessed. And this way you'll ensure alignment between what the students are learning and their assessment. To find more detail about using cognitive verbs, there are resources provided on the Structuring Learning page of the Italy website. So you're welcome to visit this page to find out where there's a wider range of cognitive verbs that you can use in assessment questions, even though we'll feature just a couple in our workshop today. So for this workshop, we've categorised the 15 auto-mark questions in Inspera to identify the action that students need to perform to answer a question. So there are 5 select questions, 4 match questions, and 1 mix question. So when you're creating questions in Inspera, we want you to look at the question types that are presented in the pop-up menu, just like the menu you're seeing on the screen, and consider that the different questions require students to perform different actions to answer the question. So for example, students may need to select answers, match answers, input a defined answer, or students may be asked to perform a mix of actions to select and input answers for a composite question. So a composite question includes question types that require students to select or input defined answers, which are auto-marked. All right, so for example, questions that require students to select an answer are multiple choice, multiple response, true, false, and inline choice. Whereas questions that require students to input a defined answer include text entry, numeric entry, and math entry. However, there is an 8th question type in a composite question. It's called math working, but it's manually marked, so we won't be looking at that one today. And it's already time for our first activity. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about what we've shared so far and see if you can apply some of the ideas. So what we'll do is we're going to ask those of you who have access to go to Inspera and find one of your own question sets and have a look for the different types of thinking skills and student actions that your questions are set up to do. So identify if you're using cognitive verbs like identify or interpret, and looking for different student actions like select, match, input, or a mix of actions. We're about to invite you to a breakout room. Remember, we've got the existing user group and you'll be joined by Dale, okay? And then we've got new users. You'll go to a room where you're joined with Tanya, and Tanya's going to share on screen a question set for you to look at so that you can talk through the activity together. So we'll set up a few minutes for this activity and leave it there. I'm also going to check on the question set while we're getting our breakout rooms ready. I'm going to stop sharing.
Breakout rooms are ready to go. I will open those up now.
Thanks. So what we're sharing on screen now is another view of the AutoMark question menu in Inspera, but this time looking at it with a different point of view, this time looking at it in terms of the complexity or simplicity to design the question. So we've categorized the 15 questions into 8 simple design questions and 7 complex design questions. And the way that we've categorized simple design is by looking at using the same question type, which may be repeated to require multiple answers, and also looking at stimulus that's quite simple, using just text, maybe a sentence or a paragraph that's displayed either beside or above a question. And when we look at categorizing a question as complex, we're looking at using a mix of question types, usually in a composite question, and also using stimulus that might be multimodal. So when we use image, it could be that it's in the main illustration, inline, background, or in the images as alternatives. The stimulus could also be added using a file, such as a PDF, which combines text and image, or adding a file of audio or video. Or the stimulus could be added linking to online content to help students find a web page, PDF, audio, or video. Of course, you can review your simple design questions and redesign them to become complex design questions if needed. And then what we've done here on the slide is matched the question design level of simple and complex to the question types and actions. So again, the purpose here of categorizing the Inspera AutoMark questions is to consider what is needed for us to build the different types of questions, as well as the actions that we're asking the students to do. And this helps us to consider how we can provide students with a variety of actions across the questions in the assessment item. So when using stimulus, we can target aspects of critical thinking for students to answer a question about a scenario or a problem in a specific context. So we can design a question that requires students to use stimulus to be able to identify an answer from the alternatives provided, which requires students to demonstrate their knowledge about the information, to identify, analyze, interpret, or evaluate, etc. So for example, a question may use stimulus for students to demonstrate their knowledge about the effect of a changing parameter, or a solution to a problem, or an optimum application of a principle. So in Inspera, stimulus examples include text, image, and tables, or audio, video, and files, and math equations. So we can use stimulus to display information in different ways to diversify the way that we design the question using case studies, scenarios, data, and article excerpts, or photos, graphics, diagrams, tables, and graphs, or audio content like speaking, sound, and music, or moving visuals with text and the option to also add audio. We can also add files like PDF and use math equations that use code like LaTeX. However, when we're designing our questions to use stimulus, we need to check that the question cannot be answered without the stimulus, so that the stimulus is doing its job. And also, we want to make sure that where we've invited students to go online and get content, that they can access it in the Inspera assessment. We don't want it to become unavailable if they're going to the assessment using a lockdown browser, such as Inspera Exam Portal. If we're finding that's an issue, we can embed the stimulus into the question or add the stimulus as a resource to the question set if it relates to all of the questions. So it's already time now for activity 2. We're going to give you another chance to have a chat for a few minutes in your breakout room. And this time we want you to look at your questions to think about simple and complex design. So just identifying the different question types that you're using, as well as the different types of stimulus. All right, so I will stop sharing my screen, because in the Padlet, with the link that you've got in our chat box here, but also we'll add the Padlet link to the Zoom breakout room chat box as well. Padlet shows us that activity 2, we can add some ideas about the simple, complex design. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Right, breakout rooms are ready to go. I'll send you there now, and this time we shouldn't get cut off as soon. You should have until 12 o'clock to do this activity. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone. It looks like we're all slowly making our way back to the main room from the activity we were in. You can hear me okay, yeah? I'm not on mute. Okay. So I hope you had some rich discussions while you were talking about the ideas presented so far in activity 2. What we've got now on screen are 4 tips that we wanted to look at to help target aspects of critical thinking. And we've categorized them by simple and complex design, again, using the AutoMark questions from Inspera. So we've got 3 tips for the simple question design, and they are looking at using a variety of cognitive verbs across questions aligned to learning objectives, also using plausible and nuanced distractors as incorrect alternatives, and using questions with multiple answers. For the complex question design tip, we've got a suggestion to use composite questions with multiple questions as well as stimulus, so that you can ask students to perform a mix of actions. So to see these examples of the tips in Inspera questions, I'm going to leave the PowerPoint and go into a question set. So I'll just stop sharing and reshare. So hopefully now you can see an Inspera question set. So what I wanted to do was first just talk you through the table of contents here. Okay, so what we've got is an introduction with a lot of information similar to what we've just been talking about in our workshop presentation. And then we're going to step through the 4 tips. So we've got tip 1 with some information and examples, tip 2 with information examples, tip 3, and tip 4 at the end. So what you can see in our table of contents is that we've mixed up the different question types. So we've got, for tip 1, multiple response, but it's been repeated on the same page. And for tip 2, we've got multi-response as well as multiple choice. Tip 3 is where we get a lot more variety. We're using multi-response, matching, inline gap match, inline choice, text entry, numeric entry, and inline choice. And in tip 4, we're focused on the composite question type, and we're looking at using different types of stimulus, section stimulus, and PDF panel. So if we just go now to the first page, you can see it matches our PowerPoint for our purpose. And we've just got a note here to let you know where the questions are sourced from. So we've got questions from UQ from the School of Pharmacy, with special thanks to Adam La Caze. And we've also got questions from Charles Sturt Uni, Brigham Young Uni, and also from industry with the CAPS test that's available online for knowledge assessment of pharmaceutical sciences. And so what we've done with the questions is try to de-identify them, particularly where they might actually still be used with students. So that's why you will see that some of the question content and answers are not correct. So please keep that in mind. Mistakes are there intentionally. And when we give you access to this version of the question set for you, you'll be welcome to make a copy of it if you like, adapt it to suit what you're doing, and relabel the questions as needed. So when you get your copy, you'll notice you need to delete the copy of text that you get for each of the question titles. Also, you'll see that the labels have been added to match our event for today, and you'll need to change those to match your assessment should you choose to use them, or maybe just use them to experiment. Also, we've just got a reminder of what those 4 tips are back from the PowerPoint, and then also some reminders here about what we mean by simple and complex design, as well as student actions that are required for the different question types. Okay, and then we've just got that slide here again with the table that organizes those 15 auto mark questions with the different types of design level and the student actions. So looking at tip 1, we're looking at using a variety of cognitive verbs. Okay, and so as we talked about already, depending on the learning objective that you're assessing and depending on whether or not you're using stimulus, it might be okay to word your question to use one cognitive verb. You might just ask students to identify something, or you might ask the students to analyze, interpret, or evaluate some stimulus and then identify the correct alternative that's been provided. Don't forget, there's plenty more cognitive verbs available on the Structuring Learning page if you want to get more ideas than what we've presented. And we've got that example here. So what we've got is some stimulus in a section panel on the left. So we've just got a few paragraphs or an excerpt from a clinical research article. Just Lorem Ipsum text though, it's just all de-identified. On the right, as you can see, we've got our instructions for the students because they're about to answer a series of questions for the same stimulus. We're also letting the students know how those questions will be marked, okay? And then we go into the questions. So we've got 4 questions here about the article. And the first question asks the students to identify based on the article. And then the next 3 questions ask students to analyze, interpret, or evaluate the stimulus to then identify from the alternatives provided. We then go into tip 2, this is where the idea was to look at the wording and content of your alternatives and think about making sure that they're plausible and nuanced, or one or the other at least. So when we talk about plausible alternatives, it might be that all of the alternatives might appear correct, but unless the student has actually achieved the learning objective, they might not be able to identify the incorrect alternative. And when you're thinking about writing those plausible distractors, you might be looking at, well, what are the common errors that you notice students have? And that could be a way of putting a few of those in so that you're making sure that, you know, they're at least in the ballpark of maybe being correct if you have a depth of knowledge to know what is and isn't correct. When we talk about a nuanced alternative and a set of those, maybe it's 4 or 5 for a question, it might be that they appear similar in the wording. But again, unless the student has a depth of knowledge, they might not be able to identify what's correct, what's incorrect. And the idea of being nuanced is to avoid being too obvious with how the alternatives are different, because that can sometimes create a cue for students to quickly identify what's incorrect because it's so obvious. So what we've got here with our 3 questions are first some examples of using plausible alternatives. So we've got a multiple response question, and then we go into some multi-choice questions. These multi-choice questions are asking students to evaluate, interpret, and analyze. However, they aren't necessarily using those cognitive verbs in the question itself. And then the last question is where we're using plausible and nuanced alternatives. And you can see straight away just from the visual of the alternatives, the wording used, they all start with decreasing, and then they change the content in terms of what's being decreased and by how much. Okay, so that's just a simple idea there for tip 2. And then for tip 3, the idea is looking at questions with multiple answers. And so, of course, you've already got your multiple response question that you can set up. But then also there are questions you can set up where you're matching, pairing, inline gap match, inline choice. They're the kinds of questions where you actually, when you're building it, you have to add additional questions, if you like, to create multiple responses. So for example, with the inline gap match, what we see very often is in a sentence or a paragraph, we don't usually see just one answer required for students, but maybe 3 or 4 answers in the same sentence or paragraph. So that's just the idea of repeating the same question to get multiple answers. Of course, when you go to do that, the students will be keen to know, well, how are you going to mark it? Are you going to give me 1 mark out of 2 because I got 1 alternative correct? Or are you going to give me 0 marks if I get 1 correct? Because maybe it's 2 marks for all of the alternatives that are correct. And so regardless of what you choose to do, it is helpful to let the students know each time how the marking works, particularly if you're changing the marking from one question to another or throughout the assessment item itself. Also, what you've got here in these examples, occasionally we've shared a purple box with a few tips for building. So when you go to make a matching pairing, it can be easier to get those multiple answers if you use your columns for terms and rows for definitions. And then in this example for inline gap match, you can see that we've got way more alternatives than we do have the boxes for students to drop their responses into. Plus, on top of that, you can also give the students the option to reuse some of the alternatives. And so maybe superiority is correct for 2 of the boxes. That's a choice you can make when you're building. Okay. At the end here too, we've just got an example of having the multiple responses required in a question type that's repeated for inline choice within a table. So just getting the students to select their answers from the left column and all the information that they need is on the right. Plus we've got a scenario instructions. In fact, the instructions you'll notice are different for each one of these types of questions, just to help give the students success to answer the best they can with their knowledge. And then tip 4 is where we're looking at using the composite question with multiple question types so that we're getting that mix of student actions across select and input. And we've just got a note here about stimulus. So typically for a composite question, you have a series of questions on the page that relate to the same stimulus. Now, if you use section stimulus, it means that you're creating stimulus that won't be attached to the question, which is fine in the question set, but in your question bank, the stimulus won't be attached to the question. So just something to keep in mind. If you go to build stimulus as a PDF panel, it means you're embedding the stimulus within the question. So when you go to your question bank and pull the question into a new question set, the stimulus is already there. Either way, it can be helpful to add instructional text for the students, just so that they are really clear that the series of questions will be about the same stimulus. And then what we've got here is just a reminder from the PowerPoint that there are 7 auto-mark questions in a composite question, and just reinforcing the ideas about thinking of using stimulus to target aspects of critical thinking and the wide range of stimulus available in Inspera. So to have a look at this in action, what we've got here is section stimulus on the left with a screenshot of the PowerPoint slide. And on the right, we've got our 7 auto-mark composite questions. And we've got a note about what the stimulus is for students, the scenario, and how the marks are going to work. And then we've got the 7 different types of questions there for the students to answer, all related to the same stimulus. Then if we go to the next example, it's actually really similar. We've got the same stimulus, but this time presented in a PDF panel. And also with the same composite questions, we've got a few more purple boxes with tips on building. So occasionally you'll see those boxes there. And they're really just to remind us of some ideas for how we format content, instructions, prompts, and mark allocation, as well as the settings. So for example, we've got some tips here about building an online inline choice, and also building a text entry question, numeric entry, and math entry. And again, in particular, certain types of questions, when we give students clear instructions, it can set them up to tell us what they know with their answer instead of guessing how to answer the question. So that was a quick run through the question set with examples. And I was then going to invite you to do activity 3 and give you maybe 4 minutes this time, a bit quicker, to see if looking at either the question set that we share with you or your own question set, what ideas you could apply from the workshop to look at making enhancements to questions where you might review the cognitive verbs, the plausible nuanced distractors, etc. For those of you who are new, we have given you access to training 1 for Inspera. So Tanya can guide you through in your breakout room. To get there, we've got links and a question set name for you to find. So I'll leave it there. We'll get you into the rooms for the last few minutes.
Right, rooms are ready to go. I'll send you there now.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone.
Jacinta, can we hear what Emma was going to say? Is that possible?
Yeah, well, we were about to go into like another 2-minute activity before we say goodbye. So we could chat then if you like, because she could add it to the Padlet to share with everyone.
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah. So to finish, we were going to remind you that there are a lot of Inspera guides and support out there for you using Inspera at UQ. As you know, you can search for guides, Google key terms to find what you want quicker from eLearning and Inspera Help Centre. Plus, you can book consultations with the eLearning team for assessment design support, as well as booking consultation with eLearning advisors for technical setup of assessment and emailing eLearning help for troubleshooting. But with that in mind, we were going to ask you now to go to the Padlet, and if you haven't been yet, please do, because this is where we wanted to just give you a few more minutes to share ideas in the Padlet, but then I'll give you a minute to chat about them. And while you're making your way to the Padlet, because our time is running out, I did want to let you know that we will be sharing a recording of today's workshop soonish from the Italy Marcoms team, and they'll also email you a request to submit feedback in a survey, and we'll also email you a copy of the PowerPoint soon after. And in that PowerPoint, we've also got, just like in the question set, the references for the ideas that we've shared with you today. So if we just go back up to the Padlet, and if I stop sharing my screen, I'd love to find out that idea that Jackie was just talking about and sharing. So we're interested to know, what would you like for the next workshop or resources? And also we had someone sharing an idea from our existing user room. I think it was Emma.
Mine was just that I have a problem with my questions. I use a lot of case studies. So I give them an example for exercise rehab and I say, you know, now pick assessment items, justify them, pick exercises and justify them. And technically, does it actually really matter what exercises they pick, as long as they tell me why? But I think the light bulb moment that I had in that last sort of session was that maybe I need to have a little bit more trust that if they're making the right decisions, when I give them lots of answers, that they have put the process together. Like, I don't need to tell them to tell me that they picked the right answer because they linked it to the assessment item properly. It's enough that they actually did pick that one out of the 5 options. So I think sometimes I need to have a little bit more trust in the process that, like, and if it was a lucky guess, that's fine, but I don't have to mark 65 case studies just because I don't have enough trust in the quality of the question that I wrote. It was just an interesting light bulb moment for me.
Thank you very much, Emma. Great tip. We're also seeing in the Padlet that we've got someone who'd love a session where you could just work together to write questions collaboratively. I'm just having a quick read of the other ones. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything out loud instead of typing in the Padlet, or if there's anything in the chat. Okay, all right. So maybe at this point, our best idea moving forward would be a collaborative writing session. Not sure if there's anything else that would help you for workshops or resources. Okay, so I'm not sure if there's anything else you wanted to share either.
Yes, please. When we get the link to the recording, may we also have the other links as well? So the link to our question set, etc., etc. I think I've tried to bookmark them, but I always find it a little bit hard to go back to things and track them down. So
Okay.
if it was possible to do that without it costing too much time.
Of course, we can do that.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Okay. So we've got a few ideas on the Padlet there. So thank you to those of you who have shared ideas. We'll have a read of them after the session. Feel free to keep adding as you like. Some smaller activities and events in semester 1 and bigger launch in May before semester 2 starts for the Inspera community to be.
Yeah, that was just,
it says.
Yeah, that was just me, Jacinta, because in response to the question, is there a community of practice?
Right.
Yeah, sort of there was, and then resources became very constrained. So we weren't able to sustain it in 2022, but we're trying to prioritize it and build it back up again in 2023. Thank you for clapping your hands, Barbara, because you were always such an active participant in our community.
So we're pretty much at the end of our session time for today. So I thank you all for joining us and hope to see you again at future events. And yeah, if you have any more ideas about workshops and resources that would help you, please add them to the Padlet. We'd be happy to try and make things that you're actually feeling that would help you use the platform more effectively. I don't know if there are any final closing comments from anyone in our audience or from the team before we say goodbye. Okay. Well, I'm sure you all have other places to go, so I don't want to hold you up, but thanks so much for sharing in the breakout rooms in the Padlet, and we'll keep the conversation going. As Jackie said, we're trying to reinvigorate the community practice for using Inspera at UQ. So we will also follow up with that email with the PowerPoint and links.